Hi folks, I'm Derek Olson, a biblical scholar with a love for the liturgy. Welcome to a Liturgical Look Forward for the week of Proper 5 in Year 2 of the Daily Office Lectionary. Every week we look at the scripture readings that are appointed for morning and evening prayer from the Episcopal Book of Common Prayer, which are the same readings that you'll find in the popular Forward Day-by-Day devotional published by Forward Movement. All right, in addition to the week of Proper 5, we're going to throw in the Feast of St. Barnabas here as well, because it normally is going to fall in this general date range. All right, moving to our first lesson. Our first readings for this week are going to be coming again from the book of Ecclesiastes. This week we're doing the second half of the book of Ecclesiastes. We did the first half last week, and as we move into the readings themselves, you see that we finish off Ecclesiastes, and we're also going to move into the very beginning of the book of Numbers. Since we're going to have Numbers next week, I'm going to go ahead and wait until then to go ahead and give that a full-on introduction. All right, you'll see that we lose about half of chapter 7, we lose a fairly large section of chapter 8, and then we're going to miss all of chapter 10. So this first one, the 7 and 8, this is a block of fairly standard wisdom sayings. There is a verse at the end of 7 which suggests that while wise men are extremely rare, wise women can't be found at all. So we are cutting out a little bit of patriarchy here. The start of chapter 8 talks about the folly of speaking to rulers who don't listen to wise counsel. All right, we're going to skip all of chapter 10. This is another collection of wisdom proverbs, but they do have kind of that cynical edge that we've come to expect from Ecclesiastes. Then on Saturday, we are going to jump into Numbers with a discussion of the lineage of the Aaronic priesthood. So back into priestly materials of the law. If there is a center of gravity in the readings this week, I think it's going to be Thursday, because that really gets at the heart of the wisdom and revolt and its conflict with sort of the wisdom orthodoxy of something like Proverbs, because it directly tackles the question of whether the righteous actually do better in life than the wicked. And the teacher's takeaway is that the ways of God are ultimately inscrutable. You can literally be the wisest person in the world, and you will not be able to fully comprehend the ways of God. Only those things that God chooses trivial, and even those things we have to take with a grain of salt because of the factor of human interpretation and human error. You can't draw straight lines from human behaviors to divine favor. So, at the end of the day, don't bother. Enjoy the basic enjoyments of life, do your work, and don't be a jerk. Moving on to our second lesson, we are going through the second half of Galatians. So he's moved through that autobiographical section, and now we're heading into the main part of the theological work that we started on at the end of last week. As you can see from our readings, we don't have any gaps this week. We're going straight through. Since this is an autobiographical letter, let me point out something that we get this week that connects a bit into the man Paul. We know that Paul had a health affliction that bothered him. He mentions at points a thorn in the flesh that he prayed to have taken away from him but was not. This is an interesting and rather important thing to note. So one of the consistent early Christian claims is that Jesus was a healer. We see this throughout all four Gospels. Furthermore, Acts continues this theme into the early church. That is, we know that the power of Jesus is operative in the church because we see his disciples doing the same kinds of things that he did, including healings. And we even see Paul doing some healings in Acts 14 and 28. So, the fact that Paul has some kind of physical weakness is a bit of a scandal. If these people, these Christians, are really healers, then why does one of their leaders have a health problem? So, one of the questions that we as moderns ask is, well, what exactly was this thorn in the flesh? And I think that this week's readings touch on it directly. On Monday, we read this. There's a reference to an infirmity and then a hyperbolic response. He says, it's because of a physical infirmity that I first announced the gospel to you. So something about his journey stopped because of some kind of physical problem. And then we have this offer in 15. If it had been possible, you would have torn out your eyes and given them to me. All right, so obviously hyperbole here, but perhaps directed to the actual part of the body that he's having problems with. Maybe this is an eye issue. At the end of Galatians, so typically Paul's letters are written by a scribe or an amanuensis, someone taking dictation, and then we occasionally have these little colophons, sections at the end, where Paul is actually writing on the scribally written letter with his own pen. And he says, "See with what large letters I'm writing to you in my own hand." So when we combine these with the whole road to Damascus episode where Paul is struck blind and then subsequently needs to have his eyes healed in Damascus, it's pretty likely that Paul's affliction is an eye problem of some sort. All right, moving into our third reading and into the Gospel from Matthew. Again, we're going to be reading through Matthew with no gaps here. We're leading up to the confession of Peter at Caesarea Philippi and the Transfiguration, but we've got some miracles to get through first. A couple things I want to point to here. First, there's the whole controversy around the Canaanite woman. Is this quote-unquote racist Jesus? The short answer from my book is no. We're seeing a Matthean theme here that points to the inclusion of the Gentiles. Second, don't miss the importance of the mentions of Elijah on Saturday after the Transfiguration. The fact that Elijah gets stuck there right after the Transfiguration is not an accident. It's actually really quite important. I think a lot of modern Christians miss how important Elijah was in the Second Temple period and in Jewish thought at that time, and why it's so important to the early Christian movements that John the Baptist is Elijah. I'm going to tackle these two topics, so racist Jesus and Elijah, in a bonus video that'll be up on the Patreon page. So there will be a link to that in the notes. And if you're not a supporter, this would be a good opportunity to go ahead and do that. All right, since we are in Proper 5, that means that St. Barnabas is going to fall in here somewhere. Right? So if you remember, the propers are tied to Sundays. In this case, Proper 5 is tied to June 8th. So Proper 5 is whichever Sunday falls closest to June 8th. Since the Feast of St. Barnabas falls on June 11th, it's always going to be right in this area. In 2018, when I'm recording this, it falls on Monday of Proper 5. So we've got 4 readings, 2 for the morning and 2 for the evening. And again, as a note, if you're following along with Forward Day by Day in its readings, you won't see the ones we're talking about here, because Forward Day by Day uses the Eucharistic readings on feast days, not the appointed daily office readings for Sundays and holy days. All right, with these 4 lessons, we're going to see the standard theme and the standard secondary theme here. So the standard theme, of course, is whenever the person's mentioned in Scripture, we try and include some of those mentions in the daily readings, knowing that we also have to have some of those for the Eucharist. So in this case, both of our Acts readings are sections of Acts that actually mention St. Barnabas. The secondary theme, then, is pulling material from the wisdom literature that has some connection either to the person or to the virtues that they're shown displaying in their New Testament readings. That's certainly what we have here. So in the morning, our Acts reading shows Barnabas as being a fairly wealthy man. He owns property, and he sells his field and then lays that money at the feet of the apostles. And then our Ecclesiastes reading then is commentary on that. It ties into that because Ecclesiastes 31 is about how the wealthy ought to use their wealth for the benefit of others. Then in our evening lesson, so Acts 9, we see Barnabas being willing to stand up for Saul and to recommend him to a church that's rightfully wary of this guy who's been persecuting them. So our first evening reading from Job is showing the righteous man standing up as a champion of the marginalized. And so in this case, we see Barnabas being willing to represent Paul to the church. I think in particular the line about being eyes to the blind and searched out the cause of him whom I did not know are important points of reference with regard to this Barnabas and Paul relationship. All right, so that's all that we've got for this week. If you'd like to pray the daily office online, check out the St. Bede's Breviary at breviary.stbedeproductions.com or stop by prayer.forwardmovement.org where you can find the office and also the reading and the reflections from Forward Day by Day. I'd like to give a big thank you to my Patreon supporters. If you've not joined us over there, come on over and join us on Patreon. Don't forget to subscribe, give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video, and let me know what you think of the show in the comments. See you next week.